you people out of town getting this tape, we're going to start off still trying to give some break-in time to the people here that I'm having very quickly. 2 more sets from last year of the Kyroots read. And so that's going to take up the first, whatever it is, 10 or 15 minutes of this tape. And then I'll start anew. Some of you might find this interesting, if not fortuitous, coincidental. In the other cities, the kind of activities that the people are continuing to do of making these tapes and little programs that they're putting together, or programs they're putting together, available to a continuing group or continuing audience that might show up. 2 people from 2 of the different groups, different sides of the country in the last week, when they've been seeing me report about what was going on, both said that they had used, to a point that they found to be highly stimulating to themselves and those involved, as a takeoff, something that I've only mentioned here 1.5 times, and it came to my mind again tonight to mention it to you, that they used as a springboard the time I pointed out, or just said to you, that once you ever see what this is all about, you're just going to die. Seems like everyone enjoys that for a moment. But before we get into tonight's message and take up the collection and sing the hymns, look around. Of course, everybody looks at me since I'm up here doing it, so that's close enough. And you very quietly, instead of praying and meditating and all that stuff, think back of all the dreams you had, all the weird books you've read, and the times that you took a little dope or stayed up all night, took a handful of diet pills even when you were weighing 87 pounds, drank 2 gallons of coffee, and believed that you were on the verge of having an insight, a cosmic insight. And the feeling that you had, that you sort of looked around, you looked at your cat, you looked at a clock on the wall, or you looked out the window and there was ordinary people walking by, and you suddenly had a general feeling, I'll put the words on it, about, oh my God. Once you ever find out what this is about, you're just going to die. But if you just look around and try and consider what's going on in life, to sit here and I can have Kyroots read and people laugh, and perhaps you'll get titillated, perhaps stimulated before I get through here talking. Seem to be fairly safe here in another city, sitting down watching the tape. It seems to hold some great promise. And some of you have been around so long, it seems like maybe after all I'm a pretty nice guy, and probably I'm fairly ordinary in my spare time, if not handsome in my spare time. But if you ever see what's going on, you're just going to die. And I don't mean just me. That's weird enough. But to look around, to look at your cat, to look at the clock, to look out on the street, and suddenly have all the feelings that you and everyone else has. And your feelings are not personal to you, your feelings are genetic. But all the feelings that life is flying apart, and 5 seconds later, the mail comes, it's a nice phone call, or God knows why, you just bend over and straighten up and suddenly feel like, God, it's great to be alive. Once you ever see what's going on, you're just going to die. And the world's at each other's throat, apparently. Good and evil's fighting, whoever side you're on. Jew, Christian, Muslim, male, female, rich, poor. But there's some battle going on, right? I mean, you feel it. You feel like that they're using you as a battlefield. You feel like the tanks are riding up and down your back all night. But once you turn around, if you stick with me and you were nutty enough to properly be drawn into this, and you ever get a glimpse of what's going on, you're just going to die. You realize that's a figure of speech. I don't mean you're going to die. If that's too colloquial, maybe that's too down home, but you're going to die means you're going to die. And it seems, under certain conditions, the longer you stick around me and this sort of thing, there's sort of little curves like in everything else, that this becomes fairly normal. It's fairly normal being here twice a week. Fairly normal seeing me. Always seems to be about the same, which just shows you how much you know. Seems to be a kind of continuity to this. I'm never sick. I'm never late. I'm always here. One person in another city had been around this for years and for a while said that when they finally got sold on me, I was the only person that they'd ever seen that never made a false step. Think about it. The consistency of it. Well, sure, there's consistency of it. I made it all up. It's my game. How can it be inconsistent? Of course, there's only a handful that's left from the very early days, those of you that feel like you missed something, if you want me to encourage it. One time, and I never mentioned it to them, I just left it for them to figure out what the purpose was. After I'd been meeting with a group, there's a few of them left here from the old original people, and I'd been meeting with them several times a week, several weeks or several months, somewhat like this. But then one night I walked out, had a nice big old cigar, and I had a glass, and I was apparently about 2 sheets in the wind. And I came on and I began to babble a little bit. I let it go on for a minute or so, enough that everybody got very edgy, like, uh-oh. And then I gave them some comment regarding the difference between the medium and the message, the tight ship and the loose cargo. And that was it. I just laid it down. We never mentioned it again. I left it up to them. But to believe that this sort of activity never has a false step was what I was even going to play a little dirty, which I already did if you heard it and pointed out, but how could it be a false step when I made up all the steps? How can I go wrong? Now, if that bothers any of you, then I'll give you a better version. How can life go wrong? See, ordinarily you look at life and people believe that life is continuing. You don't use the term life until you hang around me enough, and then you might start using it. And if you do, of course, I'm going to change it and start calling it something else. But people believe that life continually is making false steps, that life is inconsistent. And of course, your forefathers had the great stories of the battles between the gods, the major gods and the minor gods, their fallings out among gods in their families, and that this is the end result, the havoc, the chaos in which we must live. If you could see, as I was saying, of course you people know by now I was not using me personally as an example, but that there is a certain kind of comfort in the way in which I've done this for the last some years. Always here, always seems to be about the same. The message seems to keep expanding and shifting around, but there is a certain kind of consistency. There's a certain kind of comfort that I've never actually pointed out, but some of you should have already picked this up from other things I have mapped out and sketched. The great drug, the great saving grace in the city is not cocaine, it's not even religion, it's habit. Habit, habit, habit. You could call that the true genetic name of man. You could call that, at the 3D level, as far as you can see through ordinary sensual means, you could call that the definition of life, is habit. There is a comfort, which is just a word. There is a feeling of continuity, which is just a word. But there is a valid reality behind that. It is quite material, it is quite literal. And people see life itself as being otherwise. If there was some consistency, then good would finally prevail. Or at least evil would. But my God, they wouldn't drive you nuts of fighting in the streets of Beirut and Northern Ireland and in Israel. It just goes on and on and on, and good grief, why don't man straighten up? What if you just can't see correctly? What if there is the same continuity as showing up here on Monday and Thursday, and I'm always here, I'm always on time, I'm never drunk, I'm never sick, I never babble incoherently, I never accidentally insult somebody, I never accidentally say something real stupid and have to say, wait a minute, I didn't mean that, I'm sorry, I got carried away. What if you looked around and everyday life is doing that, and you cannot see, you cannot hear, you cannot feel within the correct spectrum, that you're limited to what the 5 senses can hear and see. And you look and life appears to be disjointed, life appears to be fragmented, life appears among all things to be inconsistent. And it seems disturbing. Where can a guy turn? And that would seem to be one of the purposes of religion. Somewhere that you can go, and it's consistent. Unless, of course, you're presently a member of the Assembly of Gods and been subject to Jimmy Swaggart and all kinds of terrible things. There is a consistency in life that is not seen. And I might as well roll on from that to some more things. I wonder what I was originally going to talk about tonight. But since I started there, let me point out, I don't have the bulletin board fixed up for this tonight, but let me point out that humanity would be in a kind of god-awful mess were it not for something. Can you remember where you are? And let me take a side step right quick. Do you realize that what I do here, if it was done in the city under slightly different guise, then what I tell you would be referred to as a type of scientific discoveries. And yet the way I do it is what I do is reveal presently unsung heroes, which, if you get real good, you can see as being scientific discoveries. But see, I point out to you the benefits of things that are ordinarily either overlooked or condemned, like habit, bad memory. So, back where I was going to point out that we would be in a terrible mess, since I started on that line that I already started on, were it not for something that's not normally looked at this way. We would be absolutely, if I may be so blunt, in a god-awful mess were it not for all right, were it not for downhill, let's start with the simple part. We would all be drowned. If we weren't drowned, your shoes would be continually soggy. Water wouldn't run off. It'd just stay where it fell. All right? So we can agree on that. But now let me tell you about downhill. Not only would water not run off, and all of our shoes would be ruined, you'd get into your house, it'd mess up your record collection, it'd get in your books, it'd get in your closet and get all your dresses and your clothes mildewed. It'd just be terrible. Let me tell you about real downhill, though, in another sense. I have pointed out to one and all, every time the occasion arises, or every time I make the occasion arise, that life is not coming apart. And that is one of the great acmes, those things, everybody remembers acmes, apparently correct, but impossible. Such things as those great ideas that none of us give as much to our friends as they give to us. None of us give as much love to those closest to us as they give to us. Which most people, if they're poetically inclined at all, or else if they've just been hit by a car, are inclined to feel like, yeah, that's true. But think about it. That's not possible. Not unless 2 and 2 equals 3. That is not possible in the 3D world. That's an acme. Another acme that I was pointing as one of these supreme ones is that there is no doubt that life is coming apart. The revolutionist can feel otherwise when he's told about it. Almost all of you now are old enough that you can feel in your genes, in your very being, it is there, in the part of you that was born and bred and will die in the city, the feeling. You cannot escape from it. Nowadays, the way the tempo has increased, by the time you hit many people in their late 20s, their 30s, they're suddenly overcome with a feeling, well, something's got to be done about the rampant use of drugs. And 5 years before that, they were drugging as much as anybody. Or their feeling is, this kind of new music, this kind of post-punk, this industrial noise, this is the kind of stuff that's going to ruin our children. What happened to good music like the Rolling Stones? This is downhill. It is genetic. But I want to give you a new, or attempt to point you in a new way to think about the structure of the downhill. That is, that Within any system, the smaller units, let's look at it as being a living organism again, the smaller cells can be decaying while the organism itself is growing. All right, now I said may or can. Now let me tell you directly. In life itself, the smaller cells are decaying. That is, that you have a finite visible existence here. You are decaying. It's no secret for me to tell you that everyone's going to die. Everyone has up until now, unless you and I can do something about it. Genetically, the smaller units, the smaller cells know that they are decaying and they know that they are finite. But within you, you have cells dying while you yet still grow, if you were young enough, physically. We speak about the red circuit. If you are growing now, let us say, yellow circuit-wise, if you're growing up here, there's still cells in you that are decaying constantly. When you reach a smaller level, speaking in comparison to life itself being a living organism, which it are. Don't anybody write me, I know it says. Wait until you've seen these tapes for a year or so before you start correcting my English, or else I have to keep stopping doing this because newer people get upset. The younger cells are aware of the fact that they have a finite existence compared to something else. Now, humanity knows this at a very, yellow circuit speaking, at a very vague and childish, yet childish level. Hence, the popularity in some circles still of religion. The notion of a God being a figure with a capital G, and something in some way, if they really knew what they were saying, they're saying if it was a real God, it's got to be a God sans environment. Whatever their God was that people in the city imagined, he can't have an environment, or else we got new problems. The idea of a God is to compare the finite with the infinite. It is the comparison between a living, larger organism being able to grow while smaller units within that organism decay and die. I am not making fun, again, of religion any more than anything else. It is, in a sense, a very childish initial attempt for man to be scientific. What else were they going to call it? And I don't have to just say in this way. What were they going to refer to it as 6,000 years ago? There are people alive right now, some of them with a high school education even, that can't do any better. That life itself has not moved humanity en masse, or in some great numbers, that far along. And so you have still, I'm sure, if they did a worldwide survey now, I'm sure that on this planet, the majority of people, if they said, do you believe in God and Allah, that the majority of people on this planet would say, yes, I do. It is still a very childish, a very weak, a very crude, from the viewpoint of doing this, attempt to be scientific so that there is some way to compare this genetic awareness that does not need to be verbalized specifically yet, as witnessed by the fact that it's not. Right now, I'm speaking as close in our time and place as to the specific physical, that is material, relationship between man and life itself. But the idea of a God gives these smaller cells a kind of passing, a kind of acceptable comparison between us being finite, us decaying, us with the feeling, that is, when I'm saying us now, I'm talking about ordinary humanity, that I feel like everything is falling apart, I feel like everything is devolving, that it's all going downhill. But if I can catch some people's attention just for a second, if I had some purpose, I could say, look, give them a little slapping around. Do you know anything about history? Did you stay awake just through History 101, like at junior college, over in Fair Oaks? And they go, yeah. Was your grandmother still alive? Is she still around? Well, yeah. Can you look around for a second and tell me Did you read any history at all? Especially any of you that are 40 or 50 years old, you've lived through. Can you look around and say that there is any basis in believing that life is coming apart? And just for a split second, I might get many people on this planet, if I had some purpose, for a split second, life might let this happen and go, wow. It being, you're right. Not that I convince them. But there is the common element in everyone's genes, mine, yours, and everybody else, that's not activated in them the same way it is a few people here and there. That they might get a glimpse, not that I verbally proved it, not that I was smarter than they were, but some awareness that life is not decaying. And the surprise is, God damn, how could I believe that? And then they're right back to believing it. I should be more specific since I'm talking this way. Believe is not the word. They're back in the grip of it. It's not a belief system. It is not something they've been taught. But you are in good company to feel like that the larger organism, humanity itself, life itself, is decaying because that's all you hear. You don't hear anything else. What I was trying to get you to take a glimpse of, since I brought it up tonight and started this, is that there's nothing strange. It's not that life is trying to trick you, which it is, but I'm going to leave that for another time. But it is within any organism, from you to life itself, that the smaller units can be decaying, that there's no doubt. You and I are decaying. We're not the only things here. Trees are decaying, rocks are decaying. Smaller parts than you are decaying. But the smaller units can be decaying while the larger organism is growing. The few people that get involved with this for whatever reason, and the closer I get to moving to Rio, or the closer we get to having our lease expire, or the closer I get to reaching 30, I was getting off to the side again, the more I'm inclined to give you a real big, what'd be an act be reversed? How would you pronounce it? Ibka. I got one for you. I've never even let Kyroots talk about it. Just to give you something to look forward to. The few people doing this, for whatever reason, life has them doing it. As long as I'm just talking and wandering around in the attic tonight, you newer people, here and in other places, still I know that there are people that come see these tapes in other places, and they'll come once or twice, and I'll get reports about people coming, and then they'll leave some comment, or they'll find out my address, and they'll write me telling me why they decide not to ever return again. And of course, being as big-hearted as many people are, pointing out my faults, which God knows I appreciate that. Look forward to getting the mail. But the little feeling I was going to point out is a feeling that I don't stick around here because evidently, even by tape, you've got these people here in New York or in California, you've got them under some kind of spell that they'll sit there and watch these tapes and they'll seem to laugh a lot and get something out of it. And I've watched it, and I have a PhD. And a lot of things that you said make sense. And I came 4 or 5 weeks, and I was beginning to take it seriously, and suddenly I thought, fuck, this is a bunch of shit. And that's all they can say. My subject that I was on, so that you don't lose your place, was the feeling that in some way I'm trying to capture people, or that the things that you may have learned already that you think you got from me, you didn't get it from me. The feeling that I'm out to capture somebody, or this is probably going to turn into a cult and everybody's got to believe what I say. If I wanted to start a cult, I wouldn't associate with trash. And trash would be anybody to believe anything I'd say. If I wanted to do that, hell, I'd just raise another family or stayed with one that I seem to have been picked up like a blister at one time until I knew how to cure blisters. People doing this, people attracted to this, whether it was with me or with some guru somewhere, their feeling always is that there is a special purpose for me being drawn here. 4,000 or 5,000 years old at least is this old term, and people still write me about this, that they're so glad they found the tape because they always knew that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. If I had a penny for every time somebody tells me that and repeats that, it's like in some way that they have been selected by life to do this. If you knew the truth, let me put it to you this way. Once you ever see what this is all about, you're just going to die. The thing that you have been selected, and perhaps the gods were sitting around, and that you and I were fated to come together. Once you see what's going on, you're just going to die. The thing that you perhaps have some purpose, that the gods have selected you. So that was my sub-subject. Now let's jump back where I was. After telling you that, whatever that was. Those involved with this, to continue this facade that it amounts to something. If you're born to this, if you're attracted to this, and those of you people come around and they're not sure, only you can know. But if you are, then me saying things like keeping up the facade, that becomes meaningless. It's not a joke, really. It's not an attack. It's not a veiled warning. It just is. Because if you are born to do this, and if you don't like that, if you end up doing this, and there seems to be no other choice except do this, then I got to ask you, then what other choice is it? Does it matter that there's some purpose to this? Now, the kind of trash with which I said I would not want to be associated if I was going to try and start some kind of cult of some kind would be people who would say, well, yes, it does matter. It'd have to be people that would realize this is the only thing in the world that matters to me, and if it turns out that it doesn't matter, then that doesn't matter. That's the only kind of people. Now, if you still hadn't lost your place, somebody attempting to do this, a real revolutionist, as I'm calling them still for the time being, a real revolutionist, among all people, a real revolutionist alone would be the one charged with battling against the mechanical laws that are situations, you probably got lost, that I was referring to originally. That is, that smaller units, smaller cells within a larger organism can in fact literally be decaying while the organism itself is flourishing and growing. Among all people, those involved with this, and those alone, are the ones that struggle against that. That's what you're doing. If you're doing anything, if you're doing this, that's what you're doing. That the whole structure, let's call it humanity instead of speaking about you individually, humanity continues to decay. That is, each person that's a unit in humanity finally passes right along to be replaced by yet another one. But that decay does not wipe out humanity. If you know any history, if you were wired up to see it and hear it when I point out, contraire, humanity is flourishing. And yet, wired into all but a very, very few is the awareness, the prime awareness of the decay in them, that I'm going to die. Hence, they look around. As I said, nowadays, you're lucky, it seems, most people in our time and place, this part of the world, probably into your late 20s, that you've given up the fight, you've lost the dream, whatever it was. You're married, in debt, got a bunch of credit cards, probably considering next time voting Republican. You're about done for. Then you've got teenagers coming along. Now, we're, of course, not just talking about mechanical. I don't mean that teenagers are the saviors of the world. But then, by the time you get this old, you look at teenagers, you listen to their music, look at the way they're dressed, and you think, good God, I knew things were bad, but now I'm scared to death. It is the apocalypse now. And then you want to shout the window, I don't mean now figuratively, I mean now. It's all over. We're done for. It's the Roman Empire redux. It's all over again. They've just become a bunch of heathens. They're illiterate. That is not cultural, and it is not just age. But it is tied to age. It's why everyone is inclined Almost everyone's inclined to become a Republican when they get older. Everyone becomes more and more conservative. Everyone becomes criminally dull because they are decaying. And the genetic knowledge that I am decaying then, as always, gets the feeling that there is an out there, it gets focused out there. You've got no other choice. Your brains are decaying, your consciousness is decaying, and hence a person with jaundice sees everything as yellow. And so as long as you are in the decaying mode, you look around and there's no doubt. You can't be argued out of it if somebody tried. There is no doubt life itself is decaying. Society is decaying. Friendship is decaying. Trust, honor, integrity. It's all decaying. And all that is your own knowledge that I am decaying. Those people doing this kind of activity, those few people that laugh, for whatever reasons I'm not going into, has people with these kinds of interests. Letting this kind of knowledge, I keep saying feeding it to me, lets this kind of knowledge seep out. If you're going to look at it as them having some duty, the duty is to struggle against that. Now, I don't mean a duty to make the gods happy. You might as well forget that. The duty to keep you going, to keep you from dying before you should. I don't mean literally, but to keep you from dying at the age of 20 or 30 or 40. You are, without knowing it, struggling against the smaller units decaying, having a nonverbal, is the basis of it, awareness that they are decaying, that they are finite, while in the midst of a larger organism that is not decaying. It absolutely, as always, ultimately is the case, is running so contraire, not just against, but it's into a right angle contraire to 3D consciousness that it can't be. That is, if I'm decaying, everything's decaying. There's no other way that you can see it if you're ordinary. To be doing this, you do see it. You are aware of it. You're aware of the fact that at the basic genetic level, the common bond between me and everyone else, we are decaying. They don't know why, they don't know what to make of it, and they talk about gods, and they talk about things falling apart, and they talk about evil, and they talk about life devolving. And I know where it comes from, because I got the same messages in me. I hear them. But to be able to see beyond the confines of that is to see that smaller units can be decaying, be correctly described, insofar as you can correctly describe anything here, that yes, this is decay. And yet, the larger organism, of which I am but one part, is flourishing. And it is not decaying. It is not decaying at any rate comparable to me. It is not decaying in any way that you can see, that you can't see in one human lifetime. You can't even see it in thousands of human lifetimes. Because as I said, some of you, by now, you do get a glimpse when I point out, you can feel it. That as far as recorded history goes, just leave it at that. Not going into anything else. Just for at least 6,000 years, you should be able to get a glimpse of the fact that over that period, life has not decayed. It has flourished, and it's taken man with it. So at that point, you would have to see that at least, at the very least, and this is not proof of anything, but as long as I've gotten up to this point, that at the very least, you should be able to see that 6,000 years worth of human life won't even take up a day in life's life, because you cannot see any growth, any decay in life. And yet if life has an environment itself, it's got to be decaying on some level. But 6,000 years doesn't even show up in the life of life. So there. If you followed that, I'm almost sorry I went out that far. I mean, I'm not sorry personally, but I see so many people going, and I keep thinking I'm looking at the RCA label again. Well, how about the struggle, the battle against this situation, that is, of unknown, unrecognized reality of smaller units decaying in the midst of something flourishing? What would I say that it should be your job, is your duty, It's what you should be doing is struggling against it. And in fact, if you're doing anything here, you are doing it. So how could I describe some of it right quick? I've already talked about it over and over, but you might see it in a different context. How could you struggle? What would be a struggle against this mechanical but quite real feeling in everybody that life is decaying? When in fact it is the smaller units decaying and being finite within the midst of something that, comparably speaking, is not decaying and appears to be infinite. All right? Then such a person, let's call it the real revolutionist still, such a person would not suffer when they were hurt. They would understand the difference, that there is a difference. You can be sick, but you don't have to suffer. They would not blame anybody for being sick. And if they found themselves actually suffering, taking a time out and going back to the city and suffering a while, at least they wouldn't blame anybody. If they were hurt, there's nobody to blame. They would not take insults and affronts personally, which is just to say they would not take city life personally. Whatever happened, if a semi with all 18 wheels ran over your foot, only people in the city, only those who do believe that things are decaying, I mean, there's further proof. My toes, the end of my foot now looks like something to be served at IHOP. A real revolutionist, and I'm not going into, I don't mean this as you people should at least suspect, I do not mean this psychologically. A real revolutionist pisses on psychologically, spits on it. And I'm just, of course, said that to get your attention. He treats psychology with the same respect that he does religion and horse manure and everything else in life, soccer games. But the real revolutionist would not take it personally. And that doesn't really explain anything. Every time I say it, I'm aware of that fact, and sometimes I go off and talk a while longer trying to get you to take a glimpse at something. And it's not psychological. It's not of a revolutionist, whoever I'm talking about, of having a semi run over his foot and then go, well, all right, I won't blame that truck driver because he was right there. He didn't pull up on the curb. And I won't blame, it was my fault. I bet it goes back to the way that I always wanted to punish myself when I believed my mother didn't love me. And I'll bet you that subconsciously I walked out there and I knew that happened, and I looked off. Subconsciously I wanted to be hurt again. I don't mean that. That is not a real revolutionist. A real revolutionist wouldn't talk about it to begin with. A real revolutionist doesn't worry about his mother, doesn't worry about the truck, he doesn't worry about life. It's simply this. If a truck ran over his toe, he does not take it personally. He does not take it personally if the truck driver goes by, runs over his toe, and then looks back and hollers, "Get your goddamn foot out of my way, you ugly son of a bitch." He wouldn't take that personally. And I'm not going to try and describe why not, because there is no way to describe it. I'm not going to justify what I said because it is unjustifiable. It's insane. It's not true in the city. It's not true at the 3D level. It's not true with anybody in the midst of decay. If you are decaying, then I am wrong. I am an idiot. You've got to take it personally because you're taking the basic genetic reality most personally, which is, all right, let's have the chorus sing it, you're going to die, that you are decaying. And from there, you've got to take everything else personally. But someone attempting to struggle against, to battle against this kind of situation, would not take, I started out and said insults and affronts. It's really anything, but that just sounds, it sounds like too much to even throw out at one time, so I'm just going to keep it at something manageable. The real revolutionist also wouldn't hurt himself. You're decaying, you're going to die. Everybody knows that, except only the revolutionist knows that he knows it. Everybody else doesn't know it, that they know it. So along the way, he would not hurt himself. He would learn very quickly that if it hurts to do that, don't do that. God, I love to eat about 4 half-gallons of ice cream, but boy, I hate the way I feel later. Or sometimes, I don't know what it is, I love to finally tell my mother, my boss, get off my ass. I don't have to put up with this kind of shit from people like you. And then I suffer over it. Or to holler at my mate, all that kind of stuff. It's not psychological. It's simply a fact that someone struggling against the reality of the minor units, the smaller units decaying in the midst of something else flourishing, would not hurt himself. And if he did, he wouldn't take it personally. And if he did, he would not blame anybody. Nobody can hurt, this would be the revolutionist, nobody can hurt me but me. If the real revolutionist, if this still sounds a little strange, how about this one? If for some reason the real revolutionist went out one night and got drunk, and got the next day and felt like, at least internally, a Pollock painting looks, and had a headache that made the tensions in the Middle East seem like nothing, you realize he would not blame it on anybody. And everybody else would. Anybody else in the world that gets drunk and gets up the next day. I don't mean just had a few drinks. I'm just talking about ordinary people in the city. Now, it's just one example. Trying to make it a little more down to earth. Everybody else that gets drunk to the point that they've got a serious hangover. You realize, don't you, that if you said anything to them, maybe you were with them, or you said the next day and you said, boy, you really look bad. You smile and yeah. And if you just give them any opportunity, there's a reason though. I don't mean they had a few drinks, that they actually got shit-faced and now they're suffering. They're hurt. There'll always be a reason. Always. That could be all the way from, I don't know, I just heard that an old friend of mine from college died, and we were about the same age, and I don't know, I was just going to have a couple of drinks, and I wasn't feeling that bad, and I don't know, I guess the feeling that somebody of my own age died, I don't know, I got drunk as I meant to. All the way from that to where I started out, I don't know why, I just going to have a few drinks, and I was thinking about my mother again, my childhood, and every time I think about that, in other words, the past made me get drunk. Let us say that a real revolutionist went and got drunk. Now, alcohol did the same thing to him it did to everybody else, and he got up feeling just as sick as anybody else could feel. Do you realize if he had to talk about it, which he wouldn't, but if he was going to blame anybody, if there's any way to put the blame, and I don't mean this psychologically, I'm saying that for a reason several times, there's nobody to blame. Not his past, not subconscious desires, not bad luck, not a tragedy that happened. If he had to say anything about it, it doesn't do much good after a point for me to keep saying I don't mean that psychologically at all. Because at the ordinary level of consciousness, if you give me your best ear, you listen, and it still sounds like, well, it's got to be psychological. What else could it be? It's the missing dimension. It's that there's flawed information everywhere else, and everybody takes life personally. That there is a part of the partnership and everybody that's got to have everything that happens explained. Why do you look like that? Well, I got drunk last night, but there was a reason. Why do you look like that? Well, I was up all night crying, but there was a reason. Everything's got to be explained. But a real revolutionist, that is, anybody that begins to see what's going on, there's nothing to be explained. It's all just as... Well, all right. We'll let that side of the tape go. But I did bring up several things I was talking about that I'll go ahead with. Within the partnership, within the absolute genetic, not psychological, not cultural, not sexual, not spiritual, above all, but the absolute genetic, wired up parts of human nervous system that gives everyone the distinct, the not incorrect sensation that inside of me is two people. And I've simply chose, for the time being, to refer to it as the partnership. You were born into a partnership. By the time you reach the age of being conscious, you were talking, The yellow circuit was ignited. There was a feeling in you of a partnership. In this partnership arrangement, and by the way, since I'm making all these asides tonight, I continue from across the country, people seeing these tapes to get little notes, wanting to know if I'm aware of certain things going on in the field of neurology, brain study. And they can't believe that I never mentioned certain things. I don't deal in common currency that's being used. There are things that have been going on for a good while that I'm quite aware of. But rather than you, some of you wonder why I don't mention it, look at it another way. I was thinking about it before you ever heard of it. There is a reason I cannot use possibly things that are now in the marketplace, the terms and descriptions, but yes, I'm aware of the fact, because I knew it before you ever heard about it, that they are now tracing it down to certain ideas, certain speculations they have, the way the brain is constructed itself, as they put it, physically, that seems to give a certain feeling of dichotomy, maybe under certain conditions. That's I know. And if we live long enough, and by the time this becomes passé, then perhaps I'll go back and refer to it and point out to you in more detail what they were talking about. For the time being, let's go back to my partnership. That should suffice for all of you to be aware of the fact that in you is the feeling that there's two of you. In the partnership, one of the partners absolutely insists that it has, and it has got to, I say insist, I'm just using street terminology, it has got to have everything explained to it, even if it has to do it for itself. Now, I have talked around about this from a myriad of approaches. One of the common ones, most common, consistent one being, and I keep pointing out to you, that once you learn how to do in a certain way, not just think about doing as opposed to just doing, but is to not talk to yourself about what you're doing, is not to tell yourself that I'm going to do so-and-so, that I've decided so-and-so. That is one of the most consistent uses that I have approached this reality from, the direction from. But there is another aspect, yet another, that I was trying to get your attention toward right now, and that's within everybody, that there is a partner in the partnership that must have, but there is another aspect, yet another, that I was trying to get your attention toward right now, and that's within everybody, that there is a partner in the partnership that must have everything explained to it. It will talk about everything that happened. If it is not explained to it, it will do it for itself. But it continually, and I don't mean that this is an either-or situation, but it continually either solicits or is open to what? Apparently external information. Why else would you read? By the way, I have been doing a lot of study since people seem to be interested in this, and I've come to the conclusion that reading is no worse for you than watching TV. Any of you who are worried about that? If you ever see what's going on, you're just going to die. There is built into the partnership, there is built in, at least you take that as being too psychologically inclined, in your nervous system. And it is in the higher parts, as I've been calling it, in the younger parts. It is built in that if you are conscious, there is one of your partners must have everything explained to it. When you get a glimpse of that in you, it is not something theoretical, it is not something cultural, as I said, it's not psychological. It is literally, materially in your nervous system. That you can see that in a sense that is synonymous with human consciousness. That is, everything must be explained. Everything. Try and consider, if you heard it, the ramifications, not the obvious, the ramifications that something happens. It happened. You were there, you either saw it or it happened to you, or you were a part of it. That in some way you were a part of the experience, and yet you'll hang around. Like the truck ran over your foot. And let us say this causing you a certain degree of physical discomfort, having all, I said 18 wheels, it'd be 9, wouldn't it? Unless it turned around and came back the other side. That is, for the sake of you cosmopolitan people, the long ones are known as 18-wheelers, I assume because they have 18 wheels. But if it just ran over you, I guess it only got 9. But let us say that there you stand undergoing, shall we say, a certain amount of physical discomfort. But do you understand? Can you hear me? That there's a piece of the partnership that before it calls 911 or tries to flag a car, somebody take me to the hospital, it will insist that this whole thing be explained. Now, by explained, now wait a minute. I don't mean explain why the truck did it. At the very least, it's got to be explained that maybe somebody that's standing over here perhaps will wait on this. Not either or, but it can be either one of these. That somebody says, that truck just ran over your foot. And then, and only then, can you and the other partner feel free to go, God damn right, could you call me a cab or an ambulance? And if nobody's around to see it, you look to see. And the trucker goes on like he didn't notice, then you, that is, one of the partners has to go, that goddamn truck ran over my foot. Under city conditions, the partnership will hang around a site of an accident, even if it was yours. It will hang around until it's been explained. Ah, okay. And then you cry, you holler. You're out jogging along and you step in this hole that you've been seeing every morning that somebody dug up, and finally this morning while looking off you step in it and turn your ankle so bad that you can't stand it. But it's got to be explained. Not only did you step in the hole, but it's probably explained that suddenly it strikes you the reason you weren't paying attention was how mad your husband or wife made you, or why you were worrying about the bank sending you some charges that shouldn't have been on your bill. And that's why you were looking off when you were mad. God damn, if it hadn't been for the bank doing that, I wouldn't have stepped in that hole. That's not funny. Sure it is. It's got to be explained what happened. There is one of the partners that must have everything explained. What is there to be explained? If you ever see what's going, well, it is a part of human consciousness. You cannot be conscious in the ordinary sense without that one partner and you and everybody having everything explained, including what I assume you would trust me to point out would be the obvious, such as the truck ran over my foot. But ordinary consciousness will stay at the locus of the accident until it's explained, until somebody says, the truck ran over your foot. And if nobody's there to do it, the partner will do it for itself. And only then can it apparently act. Only then has it become a part of its experience at city level. A way to look at, in case you can't see the connection, as the struggle that I said should be the proper kind of battle of you against the mechanical situation, the mechanical structure of the lesser units feeling as though, correctly so, that we are decaying and finite, and yet we're in the midst of something that is not decaying. Can you see any connection between that and what I've just pointed out? What kind of religions, to go back to something that would seem to be apropos to this in other times and other places, what kind of religion is it that has got to talk about it? What kind of people is it that believe in good forces in the universe and goodness that's got to talk about it? I'll tell you what kind of people. People. Ordinary people. What kind of people is it that say, my greatest concern in life, and it should be everyone's, is to love people. And I want you people to know I love you, and I love you, and I love you. I want you to know that, and don't ever hesitate to let me know that you need for me to tell you that. What kind of love is that? What kind of experience is that? It's the only kind that seems to be possible with ordinary people. That there is one of the partners that has got to have everything explained, including the obvious. There are just no exceptions. It has got to have everything explained. What is it that you have ever understood that you told yourself about? Now, I ain't going to give you a few seconds to think about it because we're in a hurry tonight. Nothing. That's what. The closest, in a verbal sense, for me to describe it quickly, that you've come to understanding anything, actually, new, fresh information is what you apparently got from me. And everything you got from me was always a Sir what? Prize. It was always unex what? Pected. It was always partially in where? Sane. Or at least ill what? Logical. And that sometimes, of course, I slip it in by being sort of, for what? Facetious. And it seems to kind of do a meltdown, a kind of watering, a kind of restructuring of the chemicals in your brain at that time, and you kind of laugh, and then it's like, what did somebody stick in me when I wasn't looking? But on your own, within your own partnership, that is meditating, thinking, reading, watching, listening to everything going in the city, what is it that you have ever learned, that you have ever gained of any consequence? And as far as this kind of activity is concerned, the answer is nothing. Don't take the few seconds to think about it, me to look at my imaginary watch. There's nothing to think about. The answer is nothing. But look at the beautiful arrangement. Look again at the coup de maître that life says, without you knowing it. It's just in your genes. If there's anything to be known, how can it be known if I don't say it? And I don't mean just out here, but at least I'm reading this and it says blah, blah, blah. And I go, ah, blah, da, da. Well, I'll be damned. Blah, da, da. The partner had to have it explained. Don't write me. I know how obtuse this sounds at times. Let me try it. How about this? Ordinary people throughout history, throughout the world, many people can and will say, and I quote, I don't want to talk about it. Only the real revolutionists can do it. Anybody that says they don't want to talk about it's already talked about it. This is not an attack on people. This is not pointing out stupidity. It is part of the partnership. It is a reflection, again, that people will say when they're asked about some tragedy that happened. And so, I don't want to talk about it. It's not true. But notice again, life has arranged it that people will say that. People can even believe that in some... Don't press me. Really, I don't. I told you I don't want to talk about it right now, and I don't. Really, I don't. And it's not true. That is flawed information. That is a flawed perception because they do. They must. They would not say, I don't want to talk about it if it were not so. Man would not be conscious without the ability to talk. Man would be more finite than he is if he could not talk. The more you can talk, the longer you can live at the 3D level. The more literate people are, the longer they live. Nobody's ever thought of that. Nobody can see that. But right now on this planet, we're living at a kind of a cutoff line because almost everybody now is becoming Californianized or Americanized. Almost. But there's still parts of life's body reflected in humanity on this planet. There's still some people here and there, little pockets of people they find. You know, the cargo cults, people still worshiping trees, people who are just this side of being nonverbal. There's still just a few, they keep popping up. Well, they have at least in your lifetime. They don't keep popping up. Every time they find this, the lifespan of those people is like 30 years. And there was a group that was found in our lifetime, about 20 years ago, that were just this side of being nonverbal. They were still almost at the grunt level. They had some communication, but it was almost just sounds, and that they'd never even tried to make an alphabet. But nobody's ever looked at it this way, what consciousness does to humanity. The ability to talk, which is the ability It is the reality of your nervous system being ignited to the highest possible city level at our time and place. It's coeval with an extended lifespan. So as I was starting out, and at least you forgot where I was going to point out some of the master strokes again, the more one talks at the ordinary level, the longer one can live. And if I wanted to be really smart, I could say, well, maybe not, but it just seems like it takes longer. You know, that you people drive me crazy with a continual blah, 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 blah. But I'm not going to do that, see, because I don't take cheap shots. You know why? Because it ain't necessary. The expensive shots will do quite well, even the free shots. I got some DJ copy shots that will do quite fine. There's no additional charge. So simultaneously, while it is true at the city level that the more one talks, the more verbal one is, the longer one is inclined to live. Be that as it may, if you properly knew what you were doing right now, you would be talking less. Not because you thought I wanted you to, not because you thought it would please me. You would have less and less, not mechanical, but you would have less and less acquired inclination to talk. And you would have none, that's as opposed to disinclination, you would have none to discuss that which you know. Which to you, of course, would be the obvious, not to everybody else. There is nothing to say about what you know. The only people who talk, leaving aside for the moment why I'm doing this, but the only people who actually talk are those who don't know anything. Now don't worry about out there. The only people that talk in you are those that don't know anything. They're the ones that must have everything explained. Oh, the truck ran over my foot. Oh, so she left me. Oh, I feel terrible. Oh, I don't believe I can stand this. Oh, I wonder if I'm going to cry. Oh, I wonder if a man should cry. Oh, I wonder if I should just track her down and kill her. See if you can take this jump. As long as I'm hopping tonight. If you understood the purpose of the word but, the purpose of one little word, of course it always, almost always, if you understood the reason why life, forget linguistics, language is a manifestation of your genes the same way the size of your nose is. If you understood why, the purpose of, why life has given man this word, at the city level, you would understand everything. You would just about have it down if you understood that. Why in God's name do we need that word? Why? Why? Think about it a minute. Don't look for some esoteric reason. Don't wait for a blinding flash to come down from the heavens. Just why? Just at the crudest level, why in the world do we need such a damn word? If you get one glimpse of it, it almost looks like a weakness. It looks like a continuing virus of stupidity. Now, I'm not saying this is it. I'm just trying to get you going in case you're missing why. Keep asking why, and telling you the great possibility is pregnant therein if you had some notion as to the purpose, the existence of this word. Why did not sentences that say blah, 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 period? Or at least blah, 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 and wander off. And let them put the period. Why must it be blah, 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 but blah, 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 blah? And since, I can say in case you hadn't noticed, which you haven't, is how often. Did you say how often? Yes, I did. I said often. You use this. You may think that I'd point out something that could be true, but, if you had something to say, if there was something to say, why would it not be said? Blah, 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 period. Or at least end of verse. Why would it have to be blah, 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 blah? Let me tell you something very seriously. It's da, 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 but, da, 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 da. If you didn't have a partnership, you'd have no need for the word but. If you were not conscious based on binary constructs and within binary confines, you would not need the word but. If, for the sake of you with that kind of mentality for a second, if you want to use it 4D coevally, were it not for the word but, you wouldn't have to have everything explained to you. Were it not for the, whatever the reason is for the purpose of the word but, you would not have a partner in you that had to have everything explained. Because nothing can be explained to the partner. Nothing can be explained at the city level without the word but. If you could see it in a certain way, but is almost a linguistic trapdoor and synonym for a low-level guide. It's like an always potential egress. I can always get out of this, no matter what happens, as long as we got the word but. Just because I got some laughter in the last 4 or 5 minutes does not mean that was a joke. What in the world, it has nothing to do with a formal study of English or anything you would imagine. There is a reality to it that is as material as the need for oxygen for you to breathe and for food for your body to continue living, that there is a need for that word but. There's a need for all words, but there is a specific need for that word but. And it is almost death-defying in its implication once you see it. It will show you, it will hint to you at least. If it showed you, then you'd forget about it. It will hint to you the basis of ordinary consciousness. 3D reality seen through bifocal vision of the on-off situation of ordinary consciousness. The reflections from human consciousness that are wired up to feel as though there is a continuing battle going on between two things. Were it not for that very low level, that very backward, from the viewpoint of this, that very childish and outdated feeling of consciousness that there is any struggle whatsoever going on, were it not for that, there would be no need for the word but. In your spare time, any of you who want to, consider what would consciousness be, what would your description verbally at the ordinary level of existence, of reality be, if you had to do it without the word but? What would be the proper, describable, just theoretical, but that everyone feels in the city, the describable way in which a good person should live? How could you describe how a person should properly behave without the word but? You could not. Don't think about it. I'll just tell you how I think about it. See? Because you would first point out the way people are. Or you would stop and point out the way people should be. But in either case, you would then get to There would be no explaining so-called human nature without the word but. There would be no ability for ordinary consciousness to conceive of a finite, of an infinite, of a flourishing. That is, humanity would not have had conceptions of gods were it not for the word but. There would be no way to compare consciousness with something that would be super consciousness. There would be no way to compare the finite with the infinite, the decaying with the flourishing, the knowing with the not knowing. Did anybody think when I started out tonight that we would end up on the word but? Well, but see if I can take you one other step. Because people in the city, that is everybody on this planet, but people in the city, ordinary people, slave and don't know it. You remember my pictorial of man the state. In the city, they slave and they don't know it. And you got here in the fringes, but you'll have to figure out what I mean by that. A bunch of you people, would-be revolutionists. There's a bunch of people out the fringes that suspect they slave, but they don't know why. And they normally end up extremely, or this is the way they appear, extremely pissed. Somewhat bedazzled, inclined to have trucks run over not only their toes, but other vital parts of their organism. Only the revolutionist really recognizes and understands both. Because just to believe, just to be wired up, just to have enough knowledge seeping out to where you believe that you know one, that is, all right, I'm about convinced that we're all in slavery. You know, don't write me, don't bother me with that shit. That's nothing. People's been talking about that. You didn't pick that up from me. You didn't pick that up from your understanding. People were talking about that 6,000 years ago that we know of. That is, that you people know of, if you stay awake during history. About the time that people became conscious, almost the same day. I keep refusing to tell you things I might know that they don't know about history, but all right, almost the same day that people first could talk. Just almost, all right, within that first weekend, I'll go that far. Somebody suspected, hey, we can apparently do a whole bunch of things that worms, we'll assume by then, by the weekend, they had named worms and other things. And buffaloes, we can do things they can't. And then somebody went, wait a minute, I think I'll be a philosopher. And he said, I got a feeling that we're as much enslaved as those lesser creatures are. Indeed, if they are lesser creatures. That's nothing. To suspect that you're enslaved and not know why. Don't write me with that. Don't believe that you know something. That, hey, I'm beyond now just the theory. I strongly suspect, I'm almost convinced I am. Because if you don't know why, all you are is mad. And everybody in line's mad about something, but now you think that you're mad in a philosophical way. You think that you're mad in a more refined manner than people that are simply mad because they're broke or because they're ugly. You feel like now that you're mad because you realize that we may all be enslaved. And so I'm mad on a higher level. Not hardly. Only somebody that understands the relationship between the smaller units decaying or inside of an organism that is flourishing can understand, which is absolutely insane in the 3D world, but can understand a form of slavery, the reason why, and what to do about it. Which may be a lot less than you would hope for. Or it might be a lot more than you would wish. Well, it's too bad, I say rhetorically, that I didn't get around to what it was I was going to talk about, because I still was going to talk about at least one thing I knew of. And I knew of it from several weeks ago because it was tied to an excursion I mentioned. If you remember that I said I had an excursion tonight, but since I didn't get around to the premise of it, the setup, I wouldn't give it to you. And so by me saying that, my memory is not so bad that I've forgotten that. Every week I remembered it. And I thought every week, if I get around to it, I'll bring up the subject so that I can give the excursion I mentioned, so that they won't think I forgot about it. And of course then B, think less of me, which would be as bad as a truck running over my you-know-what. A real revolutionist does not stand in line, though. And if you're standing in line with all the rest of the pigs and the cows, everybody else waiting for the slaughter, if you stand in line, you're going to be mad. If you stand in line, you're going to find fault. If you stand in line peaceably, you're not going to like the people in line in front of you. You're not going to like the people in line behind you. You're going to look up the line somewhere else and see people that you wish you were standing next to, because if they got to know you better, they would be impressed by you. You're going to look down the line and see people who are shabbier than you are, people who deserve to be at the end of the line compared to you. I thought they'd get somebody's attention. Some of you are looking a little dazed, and then you wondered, what the hell did I miss? Why do you say that? Which brings me to the question tonight that I was going to read. Why did you say that?